You are dead. Your breathing stops. Your heart stills. Your body begins to cool in the ambient air. Who gets your stuff? You might think this is a strictly modern problem. You might picture grieving families sitting in sterile law offices fighting over houses. You might imagine angry siblings arguing over frozen bank accounts. You might see a mahogany grandfather clock being carried out of a childhood living room by strangers. The concept of inheritance feels inextricably tied to modern civilization. It feels like a product of courts, legal documents, and written wills. It feels like something that requires a society obsessed with property. But the battle for what you leave behind is far older than money. For roughly 300,000 years, your ancestors had to make brutal decisions about who inherited the future. This was not a hypothetical thought experiment discussed in a university classroom. This was a daily, visceral reality. How did early humans handle the things a person left behind? To understand this, you have to completely forget everything you know about wealth. You have to strip away the concept of real estate. You have to erase the idea of a stock portfolio or a savings account. For 99% of human history, property was not land. Property was not gold. Property was survival. You did not own a zip code. You did not hold a paper deed. You owned your tools. You owned your clothes. You owned the vital relationships that kept you alive in a brutally unforgiving world. But when a prehistoric hunter died, their prized flint knife did not automatically go to their eldest son. The rules were infinitely more complex than simple genetics. The stakes were quite literally a matter of life and death for the entire group. Who actually deserved your legacy? Let us travel back 30,000 years. You are standing on the frozen, windswept plains of what is now Russia. The cold is piercing, biting at exposed skin. The landscape is a sprawling, icy tundra stretching infinitely in every direction. This is the Pleistocene epoch. You are at a famous archaeological site known as Sungar. The people who live here are highly mobile nomads. They follow the massive, dangerous herds of woolly mammoths. They survive entirely off the wild, moving from camp to stay alive. Because they are nomads, you would expect everyone here to be perfectly, undeniably equal. You would assume nobody owns more than they can physically carry on their back. You cannot hoard wealth if you have to walk 20 miles through waist-deep snow every single week. But beneath the frost, archaeologists made a discovery that completely shattered our modern understanding of ancient inheritance. Inside a carefully excavated grave, researchers found two young boys. They were buried head-to-head in a long, shallow trench. But they were not just buried. They were extravagantly adorned. The children were covered in more than 10,000 hand-carved mammoth ivory beads. They wore intricate ivory bracelets. They wore heavy belts made of polished Arctic fox teeth. Beside them lay massive, heavy spears, flawlessly straightened from curved mammoth tusks using boiling water and immense physical pressure. Think about the sheer manual labor required for this. Archaeologist Vincenzo Formicola analyzed these specific burials. He pointed out a stunning, mathematical truth that changes everything. Carving just one of those tiny ivory beads using stone tools took nearly an hour of intense, focused labor. 1 hour per bead. 10,000 beads. That is 10,000 hours of pure human effort. That represents years of relentless, agonizing work in freezing conditions. The boys were roughly 10 and 12 years old. They were far too young to have earned this incredible wealth themselves. They did not hunt the massive mammoths. They did not carve the thousands of tiny beads. They had inherited it. This means that even deep in the Ice Age, social status was already being passed down. A caveman inheritance battle was not always just about who got the sharpest spear. Sometimes, it was about who got the unquestioned right to lead the group. It was about who was born into a prehistoric aristocracy. The boys at Sungar were born into extreme privilege long before the invention of farming. They inherited profound status. But this kind of massive, material wealth was incredibly rare in the Paleolithic world. For the vast majority of your ancient ancestors, inheritance was not about shiny objects. It was not about hoarding beads or keeping fox teeth. It was about something much harder to see. It was about an invisible ledger. It was about debt. Imagine you are an early human living on the vast, sun-baked African savanna. You are an exceptional, highly respected hunter. You have crafted a beautiful, perfectly balanced wooden bow. It took you weeks to find the exactly right piece of flexible wood. It took days to shape it over a fire. You know every curve and imperfection of the weapon. When you die, your children eagerly claim your bow, right? Wrong. In many ancient and historically observed hunter-gatherer cultures, your personal items would absolutely never go to your children. They would be violently destroyed. They would be broken into pieces. Or they would be buried right next to your rotting body. Keeping a dead person's belongings was often considered highly dangerous. It was viewed as spiritually toxic. The physical objects were intimately tied to the living soul of the person who made them. To use a dead man's bow was to invite his restless ghost back into the camp. To wear a dead woman's beads was to carry her shadow on your chest. When someone passed away, their name was often never spoken again by the tribe. Their temporary shelter was abandoned or burned to the ground. Their physical legacy was intentionally, systematically erased. The tribe had to move forward. They could not be weighed down by the heavy, haunting presence of the dead. Furthermore, nomads simply cannot carry a massive physical inheritance. If your father dies and leaves you 5 heavy stone axes, 30 thick animal hides, and a massive pile of unworked flint cores, you have a serious logistical problem. You cannot drag all of that across the unforgiving savanna. Your physical carrying capacity strictly limits your material wealth. So, if your children do not inherit your physical stuff, what exactly do they get? How do you give them an evolutionary advantage? How do you ensure their long-term survival when you are no longer there to protect them? They inherit your friendships. They inherit your strategic alliances. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent decades studying the intricate social networks of the Jew/Hoansi people in the harsh Kalahari Desert. She observed modern hunter-gatherer dynamics that echo deeply into our deep ancestral past. She documented an ancient, life-saving system of mutual aid. It is called the Hexero exchange. Hexero is a vast, invisible network of delayed gift-giving. It spans hundreds of miles across brutal, unforgiving, arid terrain. Here is exactly how it works. You give a beautifully crafted ostrich eggshell necklace to a friend in a distant, neighboring camp. You do not ask for anything in return at that moment. You just give it freely. Months later, maybe even years later, that distant friend visits your camp. They give you a finely crafted, highly lethal set of hunting arrows. This is not a direct, immediate trade. This is not a prehistoric barter system. You are not buying arrows with a shell necklace. You are doing something much more profound. You are building a permanent, unbreakable web of mutual obligation. Why does this matter so much? Because the savanna is wildly unpredictable. One year, your local hunting grounds might completely dry up. The animal herds migrate far away. The local waterholes turn to cracked mud and dust. Your immediate family is facing imminent starvation. Because of the Hexero network, you are not trapped. You pack up your starving family and travel 50 miles across the desert to your Hexero partner's camp. Because of the simple gifts exchanged years ago, they are socially obligated to welcome you. They must share their gathered food. They must share their precious water. You survive entirely because of these distant, maintained connections. Hexero is an ancient, decentralized insurance policy. When you die, this powerful web of obligation does not disappear. It transfers. Your children inherit your Hexero partners. They inherit the social debts that others owed to you. This was the true prehistoric trust fund. You did not leave your children a rotting pile of mammoth meat. Meat spoils. You did not leave them a heavy stone axe. That just slows them down. You left them an ironclad network of reliable people who were bound by honor to keep them alive. Your legacy was the safety net you carefully wove while you were breathing. You spent your entire life depositing goodwill into a social bank account. When you died, your children got to make the critical withdrawals. But what happened when someone actively tried to hoard power? What if one aggressive, highly skilled hunter decided he wanted his children to rule the tribe like kings? Ancient humans were fiercely, violently protective of their strict equality. They did not just hope for equality to happen naturally. They enforced it aggressively. Anthropologist James Sussman has written extensively about how early hunter-gatherers actively dismantled human arrogance. They recognized that extreme inequality was a direct, existential threat to group survival. If a hunter tried to pass down too much absolute authority, the tribe would intervene. If someone claimed too much fertile territory for their own exclusive family, the community fought back. They used a powerful, psychological social mechanism to crush the ego. Anthropologists call it demand sharing. Demand sharing is exactly what it sounds like. If you had something highly valuable, you could not hoard it. Anyone in the tribe could simply walk up and ask for it. You were socially, culturally obligated to say yes. Refusal was simply not an option. If you refused to share your surplus, you were labeled stingy. Stinginess was the absolute ultimate prehistoric crime. It meant you actively put yourself above the group. If you continued to hoard your wealth, the tribe would mock you relentlessly. They would shun you completely. Eventually, they would violently exile you. And in the Pleistocene era, being exiled from the group meant certain death. You cannot survive the Ice Age alone. Renowned anthropologist Richard Lee documented a highly similar psychological practice in his 1963 field studies. It is called insulting the meat. When a highly skilled hunter brought back a massive, difficult kill, he was never praised. He was not treated like a conquering hero. Instead, the entire tribe relentlessly made fun of him. They called his impressive catch scrawny. They called the hunter lazy. They complained loudly about the terrible taste of the fat. They did this entirely on purpose. They insulted the meat to keep the successful hunter's ego in check. They made absolutely sure he knew that his success belonged to the whole group, not just himself. He could not leverage his superior hunting skills to build a permanent dynasty. He could not pass down an arrogant, dictatorial legacy to his sons. So let us deeply reconstruct the emotional days following a sudden death in a prehistoric camp. The sun dips below the rugged horizon. The sky turns a deep, bruised purple. The campfires burn low, casting long, flickering, orange shadows against the limestone rock walls. The haunting morning songs echo into the cool night air. Your body is laid to rest in the dirt. Your favorite tools are placed gently beside you, destined to slowly return to the earth. There is no formal reading of a written will. There is no aggressive lawyer dividing your estate into percentages. There are no bitter arguments over who gets the largest shelter. Instead, the wise elders of the tribe gather in the center of the camp. They sit in a tight circle around the glowing embers. They are there to actively distribute the invisible wealth you left behind. They speak your name one last time. They remind your grieving children exactly who owes you favors. They recount the specific times you shared extra meat with a neighboring camp during a brutally harsh winter. They map out the complex alliances you built over decades of survival. They officially, verbally transfer your massive social capital to the next generation. The inheritance is entirely social. Your children do not gain a physical, material advantage over the others. They gain a massive survival advantage. They are incredibly wealthy because they are deeply loved. They are wealthy because they belong to a community that perfectly remembers your generosity. They are protected by the enduring memories of your kindness. This beautiful, balanced system worked flawlessly for hundreds of thousands of years. It kept early humanity alive through brutal ice ages, massive supervolcano eruptions, and severe, continent-wide droughts. It was the ultimate evolutionary adaptation. But then, something shifted in the timeline. The global climate warmed. The massive glaciers retreated. About 12,000 years ago, in a fertile region known as the Levant, a specific group of humans called the Natufians did something completely radical. They stopped moving. They found local areas so unbelievably rich in wild grains and game that they simply did not need to follow the migrating herds anymore. They built permanent, heavy circular huts. They built massive stone mortars to violently grind their daily grain. They started burying their dead not in random, far-off caves, but directly under the packed mud floors of their own houses. This simple act changed absolutely everything. When you bury your ancestors directly under your living room floor, you are making a massive, permanent statement. You are formally claiming that specific piece of dirt. You are saying to the world, my grandfather is buried right here. Therefore, this house, this land, belongs exclusively to my bloodline. We see this vividly at ancient archaeological sites where plastered skulls were discovered. People would dig up the skulls of their ancestors, cover them in thick plaster to recreate their faces, and display them prominently in their living spaces. These terrifying skulls were essentially prehistoric property deeds. They visually proved your direct lineage. They proved your absolute right to inherit the physical house. This monumental shift brings us to a strange, highly counterintuitive twist in human history. The invention of agriculture was actually a massive trap. When humans slowly transitioned from mobile foraging to sedentary farming, the very definition of property mutated permanently. You could suddenly own a piece of dirt. You could build a physical, wooden fence around it. You could grow massive fields of wheat and hoard the surplus grain in giant, guarded silos. For the very first time in human evolution, wealth became entirely physical. Wealth became heavy and stationary. And because it was physical, it could finally be hoarded. It could be locked away behind walls. It could be defended with violence. The concept of inheritance transformed overnight. It went from being an invisible, beautiful web of friendships into a tangible, countable, physical asset. You could leave your children 100 acres of prime riverfront farmland. You could leave them 1,000 bushels of rotting grain. You could leave them a massive herd of domesticated, captive cattle. And the exact moment inheritance became physical, human inequality exploded like a supernova. The ancient battles over inheritance turned from quiet, respectful social agreements into bloody, vicious, multi-generational wars. If land equals absolute power, then you must protect your land at all possible costs. You must ensure it absolutely stays within your specific bloodline. This obsessive, all-consuming need to control physical inheritance is exactly what birthed extreme patriarchy. Men urgently needed to guarantee that the children inheriting their vast, profitable farmlands were actually their own biological offspring. This led directly to the strict, violent control of women. It led to rigid, unbreakable marriage laws. It led to the dangerous concept of legitimate versus illegitimate children. A child born outside of the legally recognized marriage was entirely cut off from the physical inheritance. They were left to starve with nothing. We traded a beautiful, resilient safety net of deep friendships for a fragile piece of paper that says we own a temporary patch of dirt. We traded egalitarian survival for fences, padlocks, and endless legal disputes. The entire structure of modern society, the courts, the banks, the violent borders, is built directly on this agricultural obsession with keeping physical stuff within a specific, verified bloodline. Look closely at your own life today. The distant echoes of this transition are absolutely everywhere. You spend decades of your prime life working a highly stressful job just to pay off a 30-year mortgage. You obsessively check your retirement accounts. You save money in a bank, desperately hoping it grows faster than inflation. You buy expensive life insurance policies. You accumulate endless amounts of stuff. As you get older, you stress immensely about what you will leave your children when you are permanently gone. You pay lawyers thousands of hard-earned dollars to write down your precise wishes on complex legal documents. You do this to actively prevent your family from tearing each other apart over your belongings. You have likely seen families completely shattered because of a bitter dispute over a grandmother's ring or a father's vacation home. You are still playing the exact same survival game your ancestors played on the deadly savannah. You are just using completely different tokens. You are desperately trying to ensure that your offspring have a massive advantage in a harsh, unforgiving world. You are using modern money and real estate to build a protective wall around your children, hoping it keeps them safe from the chaos. But the ancient, primal truth remains buried deep inside your psychology. You can leave your children millions of dollars. You can leave them a sprawling, empty mansion. But if the global economy suddenly collapses, If a natural disaster violently wipes out the property, if the abstract, imaginary system of money completely fails, what do they actually have left? The most valuable thing you will ever leave behind is not sitting in your bank account. It is not parked in your concrete driveway. It is not a legal document locked safely in a steel deposit box. The true measure of your wealth is exactly who will answer the phone when your children call for help in the middle of the dark night. The true measure of your legacy is the network of people who will step in and aggressively protect your family when you are no longer physically able to. It is the deep friendships you actively nurtured. It is the favors you freely gave without expecting absolutely anything in return. It is the social capital you slowly built by simply being a good, highly reliable human being within your modern tribe. For 99% of human history, that was the only inheritance that mattered. It is still the absolute only inheritance that cannot be taxed, cannot be stolen, and cannot be destroyed. You are dead. Your breathing stops. Your heart stills. Who gets your stuff?